Hello, my name is Dmitry Martinovich and you're watching rptv. In today's episode, we will be presenting the February 16, 2023 meeting of the SDP Planning Committee. The meeting was facilitated by Marlene DeGenova, the market co-chair of the SDP. The main agenda of the meeting is a report by the SDP Funding Task Group, Adonis Huggins from Focus Media Arts Center, and Sarah Jane Grow, a Regent Park resident. The report is critical of the City of Toronto's funding unit's handling of the 2022 and the 2023 SDP funding. The Regent Park Social Development Plan, also known as the SDP, is a community-wide initiative aimed at fostering unity and togetherness among all the different residents groups and stakeholder groups in the community. The Social Development Plan is built around 4 areas of priorities of the SDP. Each priority is represented by a different working group. The SDP working groups are safety, communications, employment and economic development, and community building. In addition to the 4 working groups, there is an SDP Planning Committee that meets weekly to help guide the activities of the SDP. Let's go to the meeting and see what transpired.
So I think we're into our reports at this point, and I think that is Sarah Jane and Adonis. You have something to report regarding your funding task group?
Yeah, just before that, can we have the recording on? Oh, it is on. Okay, sorry,
Yep.
it is on.
Yep.
Okay.
Can I also add something to the agenda, or
Yes.
if not, then next week? Although I think we put
if we have
the agenda
time.
this week.
Yeah, what is it?
So it's setting dates for the report back meeting and the next stakeholders table. And also want to just remind people that we don't currently have dates for capacity building and I think strategic plan. I don't think we have to set those here, but the 2 big meetings we should set at a planning committee meeting.
Okay. All right. We'll see what we have time for. Okay. Please go ahead, Adonis.
Yeah,
and
so Sarah Jane and myself are reporting back from the SDP Planning Committee's funding task group related to concerns identified with the 2022 and 2023 funding. And we're presenting on behalf of the funding task group. As many of you know, on January 17, 2023, the SDP Planning Group committee formed a funding task group and empowered the group to work with the SDP co-chairs to meet with senior city staff to express our dissatisfaction with the City of Toronto Community's funding unit's handling of the 2022-2023 funds. In review of the 22 and 23 funding allocation, we have come to the conclusion that the community funding unit has redirected the SDP funds from the SDP network to the wider community. Essentially, we believe that the SDP stakeholders table is no longer has control of the SDP funds that were allocated to them by City Council, and the CFU, which is Community Funding Unit, is not interested in partnering with the SDP around the allocation of the funds. Our conclusions are based on 4 actions that the Community Funding Unit carried out around the 2022 funding allocations, and we suspect that they plan to do exactly the same thing related to 2024 and 2025 SDP funding. So here are our conclusions, and what we'd like to do is myself and Sarah Jane will go through our conclusions and then open it up for questions. At the end of this, we really want to check whether the SDP members here today feel that these concerns are valid, and to direct the co-chairs to meet to essentially set up a meeting with the task force and with the city to explore how we're going to resolve these issues. So I'll start with the first concerns, and Sarah James will go to the next one. And then, so there are 4 concerns that we're going to talk about directly. The first one is opening up of the SDP funds to non-involved groups. So in the past, all funding projects derived from the applicant's involvement in the SDP network as part of the SDP collaborative process for determining how funds should be spent. This was because our model was based on a collective action strategies in which stakeholders work together through involvement in working committees to identify the needs, determine priorities, and implement funded activities. So this happened in 2020, in which we worked with the city to identify and fund the funding priorities of the working committees. And then 2021, when we went through a process of the deep dive. In 2022, the city community funding unit insisted that the SDP funds should be open to any individual and community group that was operating in Regent Park, despite no prior involvement in the SDP or participation on the working committees. Subsequently, there are a number of projects funded under the 2022 SDP funds that have no prior connections to the SDP. Additionally, under city's notion on confidentiality, the community funding unit opposed the SDP funding committee's view that all successful applicants awarded with SDP funds had to join the SDP network, work with the SDP, or be accountable in any way to the SDP, including releasing evaluation information on their projects. It's very clear that they really fought us about this. And only now that they're reconsidering that position. And they haven't even given us assurances that this is the case. So we find this unacceptable, considering that the SDP stakeholders table is ultimately accountable to the city on how effectively the funds were used to implement the SDP. So this is our first concern, and Sarah Jane will go on to the second one.
All right, the second one was use of an independent panel to decide SDP funds. So using the argument of conflict of interest, the city funding unit staff was not interested in any communal process enabling the SDP network to self-determine the allocations of the SDP funds. Instead, the city insisted on establishing an independent review panel consisting only of residents who were non-applicants and non-members of the NDP because of the conflict of interest. Only after we objected did the city agree to add 4 non-applicant resident members of the SDP representing each of the working groups. These members were selected by Toronto Council and had to meet the city's, or their funding unit, had to meet the city's criterion of conflict of interest, effectively ensuring that even these panel members were even less involved and less knowledgeable about the projects they were evaluating, which makes no sense at all. Additionally, while the city considered these 4 SDP members as representatives of the 4 working groups, they were not allowed to disclose their participation on the panel to the members of the SDP, or to seek counsel from the SDP on the applicant projects they were reviewing, or to seek advice from the SDP membership on just how aligned the applicant projects were to the SDP priority areas. So, although the panel would undergo an information training session, the city's funding unit objected to our being involved in co-designing or co-participating in the training session.
The next, thank you, Sarah Jane. The next concern that again is evidence of the fact that the city is essentially taking over the SDP funding is the lack of attention paid to the importance of the SDP priority areas. The refreshed SDP revolved around 4 priority areas: community building, safety network, communications, and employment and entrepreneur. The initial 2020 draft application that CFU released for consultation with the SDP had no mention about the funding priorities. and there was no, they felt there was no need that it had to be aligned to the 4 priorities of the SDP. The 4 priority criteria was only added after much opposition from the SDP Funding Committee. And that included an appeal to the CFU manager, Jennifer Hoffman. At this point in time, so it was added, but at this point in time, due to lack of information on projects, the SDP Funding Committee is still not able to determine whether or not all the SDP funded, all the 2022 funded projects are aligned with the priorities of the SDP network, because we have no information of these, not real information on these projects. So we actually don't know how aligned they are with our priority areas. So our concern is that the city only gave lip service to the priority or areas of the SDP. And go ahead to Sarah Jane, will continue with the next one.
Thanks, Adonis. So then we come to the unilateral decision to reallocate the 2023 funds to the 2002 applicants. Just out of the blue, completely unilaterally. During the 2002 application process, the city funding unit decided to conditionally allocate 2023 funds, which hasn't even started to have the projects go ahead, to 2002 applicants without consultation with the SDP. The decision to not consult with the SDP Planning Committee, a coordinating body set up to assist the SDP stakeholders table and the governments of the SDP, or with SDP Funding Committee, was in total disregard of the SDP network and the year-long review that the SDP Funding Committee undertook to review the funds. As such, the city's decision to allocate the 2003 funds without seeking the SDP's input is a clear violation of the implementation of the 2022 application process. Regardless of the motive behind this, the failure to consult the SDP is unacceptable and quite frankly insulting to all of membership of the SDP. The resulting fracture between the city and the SDP is evidenced by the unanimous decision by the SDP Planning Committee to register a grievance to senior staff and by some to make deputations before the Budget Committee. Now, at this point, that the city has named and conditionally approved the groups involved, the SDP Planning Committee has no desire to cause further division in the community by officially opposing the CFU's decision in council. Whether the CFU staff realizes it or not, their actions have diminished the effectiveness of the SDP. It reduces the network's ability to identify funding priorities and to undertake collective active strategies that respond to the community needs. Therefore, we are calling upon the Planning Committee to, 1, support and validate these concerns that we have identified, and 2, direct co-chairs to set up a meeting between the SDP co-chairs, selected representatives of the funding task group, and senior city staff to discuss and seek resolutions to the concerns we raised.
So that's what we have come to the conclusion. And essentially, we are asking the Planning Committee for their support on these resolutions. And we're open at this point for questions or comments.
I have a correction in the first paragraph.
What paragraph?
There's no
Well, near the
No
beginning, there is no 2025 funding year under the current approved funding.
Okay, thank you.
It ends in 2024.
Okay. With hands up, is Richard? Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we could break down some of the concerns that came out of there, because I think there was a few concerns that were resolved that were brought up for some reason, and I'm not sure why we're going back to bring up issues that were already resolved. The other piece where I thought we were, and I thought we sat down and had this conversation, was that we were going to talk about having communication about what collaboration looks like between, but it seems like we've gone way back and now we're back at the beginning again of this whole thing, and we're talking about 2022 funding for some reason, when I thought that a ton of those pieces were resolved and the issues were the 2023. So I'm honestly a bit confused by this.
What do you think has
whole
been resolved,
process.
Richard? Can you be more
Sorry.
specific?
Pardon? Oh, there were some things that Adonis said, and then he said, but the city resolved that, like having 4 panelists and some of those other pieces that were agreed to moving forward. Those were agreed to, and so I'm trying to figure out where this is going, or is this pertain to 2024 funding and how that process will work? Like, I'm not sure what I'm really confused at where this is going to get us, or what the benefit is in this for the group.
Do you want to answer that, Adonis, before we move on to the next hand?
Sure. So yes, Richard. So what we're looking at actually is we discovered a pattern in our negotiations after we reviewed everything. Which initially started by just in terms of the city not discussing with us with the 2023, but we looked at a pattern, and when we looked at the pattern, we discovered that there are these 4 areas cumulatively together indicate that the SDP has lost control of the SDP funding. So in looking at that, we're looking at the panel, for instance, in which we agreed to as part of the negotiations, but we agreed to under pressure because of the timelines. That we wanted to get the funding out there. So we agreed to a panel, but there were always concerns about that. And now we're going back and looking at those concerns and had come to the conclusion that the city really wasn't interested in a real partnership.
And
So that's where this is coming from. We're just looking at the pattern, the history of this, and looking at all the indicators that really represent that that we felt that there wasn't really a compromise. It was really that the city didn't really meet with us until the later stages, that there was a pressure to get this funding out, and we made compromises that were really against our values. So that's where this is coming from, Richard.
Okay, Waleed? Thank you.
Thank you, Adonis, for articulating the concerns of the funding committee and the many concerns raised by residents of Regent Park who have shown up to planning committees. I think this is related to the next funding cycle. We all are aware that the budget was approved with very few amendments. Was it yesterday? From what I recollect.
Yeah.
And the mayor has officially resigned. So hopefully the new mayor and council will be able to have a budget that best supports the goals of the SDP and the priorities that were funded as articulated by Adonis. I'd like to move a resolution. Actually, I'd like for us to vote on this. I think we've had a lot of discussion already in various planning committees, and I know Sarah Jane wants to speak next. So, hopefully after Sarah Jane, we can take that vote. But for the record, I am in support of the letter drafted by the funding committee that will delegate co-chairs and members of the funding committee to meet with the city and other elected officials to find a solution soon. Because if we want to set ourselves up for success for the remainder of the years that are funded, we need to act now. So thank you.
Okay, Sarah Jane? You're muted, Sarah Jane. Can't hear you.
Yeah, I know. After all that, I just want to point out, Richard, that when you talk about the panel and that was resolved, that wasn't resolved, as Adonis said. You missed the word insisted. And so, and that we were not consulted, And it was not a resolution at all. We didn't agree with the panel. No, but we had to keep everything secret. We went on and on and on, and to tell you how non-functional that panel was, that it had nothing to do with us, that we weren't even asked about anything. We weren't asked to do it. We weren't involved in the training, and it was thrust upon us. I'll use the word thrust because it's politer than the word I want to use.
Thanks.
So I think that's not true. The SDP had 4 members sitting on the panel, and they were involved, and the other ones were Regent Park residents that were involved in this. Like, I'll say this again, the city sees the Regent Park community as a social development plan, not just this table. And me and Adonis talked about this at the ED network, and we had this conversation. This is one of the largest breakdowns in our communication, is the way that the city, SDFA, myself, and the community funding unit, the way that we see the social development plan, and the way that this table sees the social development plan is different. Another thing I want to call out is that the connections to some of the funded projects that are at the table, and there's been some talk that this one doesn't do any work here or that one doesn't do any work. All of those organizations that are there have done the work. Street Haven has been in the community and in the downtown east since 1967, I believe. And we are going to bring a presentation. We have had conversation with the executive director of Street Haven to bring them to the table for them to present to the work that they do. They do a lot of work that are outside of the scope of that a lot of people would see, because they work with a lot of people that are underhoused, homeless, and some people that are victims of violence. So we are bringing people to the table. So I'd like also for us, Adonis, you called out a few organizations or funded projects that are not attached to the SDP. I'd like to know what organizations or what groups we're talking about, so that myself and Daniela can identify that and speak to it, because we have met with pretty much almost every funded group so far. So we'd like to also identify those funded groups to bring that up, because I don't think it's fair to just say funded groups. Please identify which ones.
Okay, Deanie?
Yeah, I think, in all fairness, it's kind of awkward right now. Your city staff, kind of opposing us from being able to talk to the city and raise our concerns, Richard. But one of the things I want to share with you is that the city at this point in time sees the social development plan very differently than those who founded the social development plan and collaboratively developed the original SDP. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of yous around that, were involved when we started this.
That's right.
There's a few of us that are. One of the folks that, was around when we started this is Deborah. So, just because you see things differently doesn't mean you're right. And so I think it's timely that we need to have this conversation, because it's been going on for a while and it's been getting progressively worse.
Sorry, at what time did I say that I don't think that we should have this conversation? I'm okay with having the conversation. I just want to narrow down the conversation and pick pieces out so that we can actually have a conversation that is narrowed down and not so broad.
Okay, because I thought you were kind of pushing back. I thought you were kind of pushing back.
I'm not pushing back at all, and I haven't pushed back. What I'm saying is, if we're going to go have this conversation, let's make sure it's directed and it has points that we need to talk about. But if we're going to talk about specific funded programs, let's talk about that. If we're going to talk about specific pieces, let's talk about that. I by all means, am I not saying anything to say you guys can't go talk to my management staff or whoever. That's not where we're at with this. We're trying to build collaboration, and that's where I'm at. But I'm also trying to narrow down the conversation so that it can be a lot more useful. And I think we just need to take some of the stuff that's in the weeds out and really narrow down what the actual conversation is that we need to have. Because I
Okay.
think sometimes we're going in there and the conversation is much too broad. One of the major problems is that the city sees the SDP differently than the SDP sees the thing. That's one of the major breakdowns in this. And we know that we've had that conversation in the past. The other pieces are around the funded projects. Please let's identify those so then we can talk about if they are attached or not attached. And then there's I think there was 2 or 3 other points that Adonis made and Mary Jane made within their documents that I think we need to just identify just to make sure those are
okay, 'cause
all
I
solidified and valid points.
Okay, Richard, because I was just feeling again, the city is trying to control us. You know, so please stop.
I think you're completely wrong on it. I think I'm actually supporting this table and I continue to support this table. And I've had multiple conversations supporting and advocating for this table around multiple pieces within Regent Park. I really think those comments are unfair
I
and
appreciate
unjust.
that. I appreciate that.
I think your
Richard.
comments are unfair and
I know,
unjust.
but Richard, I just wanted to share with you how I was feeling. I want to be open.
And I'm also sharing with you how I feel. Those comments
Okay,
I think are
well,
unfair and unjust.
all right, fair that you feel that way. You're allowed to have your feelings.
I would like to say something as a co-chair. It's one thing to say the words, and this is not you, Richard, okay? This is not you, so I'm setting it aside. We deal with the people at the city, okay? And they can say anything they want, but the tangible result is what it is. And it feels very much as though they are trying to control us because they are. It simply is what it is. The power is being taken away from us as the people here. And the SDP is our structure. And anyone who gets grants should be involved in the SDP because that is our structure. It's what we agreed to. And if they are deciding that other people should be getting grants, then they should be brought into the SDP, which is our structure. And if they're deciding, no, they're not going to do that, they are taking over something that they agreed to. And we have to live with the result. And if they're saying, no, doesn't matter, the SDP doesn't matter, then they're completely disrespecting something that's important to us as a community and is something that's working for us as a community. And our community is the most important thing. And this is about Regent Park and about the way that Regent Park works. And they're being disrespectful. And many people that we work with now in city are new. They are new people who simply don't know how it was set up, have no experience in the way it was set up, but we are the same old crowd. We are the same old crowd living with the result. And they have to respect that. And you cannot come in as new people saying, oh, you know, these things don't matter. They darn well do.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And please follow our social media platforms. And for more information, please visit our website.